So 42.3 is about the energy transfer between trophic levels. So those trophic levels would be our primary producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers, and so on. And this you'll probably remember from regular bio. So secondary production, as opposed to primary production from the last lecture, is the amount of chemical energy in food converted to new biomass during a given period of time. So in this case, when we're taking a look at our efficiency, we see that herbivores use only about 1/6 of the total energy from plants to produce new biomass, so to produce new chemicals of their own. This production efficiency can be calculated as the fraction of energy stored in food that is used for secondary production. So we can calculate this as the net secondary production times 100% over the assimilation of primary production. So the net secondary production is any energy used for growth and reproduction. And then the assimilation is the total energy consumed and used for growth, reproduction, and respiration. So they would give you these numbers, and then you would be able to calculate that production efficiency. This is an example of a caterpillar. So you can see if we assume that the caterpillar consumed 200 joules of energy from plant material that it ate, about 100 joules of that is going to go to feces, and this is not assimilated. Another 67 joules are going to go to be used as cellular respiration, so energy for the organism to do its daily tasks and make ATP. Out of that 200, only 33 joules are going to be used for growth, either making new parts of itself, or which are then going to be consumed by the next consumer in secondary production. So only a very small amount of that 200 moves on. After thinking about this, we can see different organisms have different production efficiencies. So birds and mammals have a very low production efficiency rate because it costs a lot of energy for them to maintain their internal body temperature. So endotherms are like warm-blooded animals. They have to regulate their own body temperature. Fish have production efficiencies around 10%, and very small organisms like insects and microorganisms actually have higher production efficiencies. So it depends on the organism, but you can see as we move up the pyramid, it also gets a lot smaller. Trophic efficiency is the percentage of production transferred from one trophic level to the next. And this is something that we talk about a lot in regular biology, about how only about 10% of the energy consumed by one trophic level gets moved on to the next one. So this includes energy lost through cellular respiration and feces, as well as energy that is stored in portions of food that may not be consumed by the next consumer in the ecological pyramid. So when we think about trophic efficiencies, we can multiply them over the length of the food chain, and we see that by the time we get to the top, the tertiary consumer, if we take only 10% each time, we're sitting at only about 0.1% of the original energy that was fixed by photosynthesis. So if you follow that energy up and you see only 10% makes it to each level, by the time you get to the third consumer, you really don't have a ton of energy to deal with. And so we can represent this in what's known as an energy pyramid. And you can see, even though we may have 1 million joules of sunlight, it decreases by 10%. And by the time we get to our tertiary consumers, they're maybe only getting 10 joules. And so this is a big part of the reason why, number one, we don't have a lot of tertiary consumers in general. And number two, we also can only go up so many levels in a particular ecological pyramid. We might be able to hit quaternary consumers, but they would only get 1 joule of energy. And then if we went even higher than that, it would be even less. So there tends to be a lot more primary producers because they're getting all this energy from the sun. And then the amounts of these creatures tends to decrease as we move higher in the pyramid. This also gives us a good opportunity to study biomass. So when we take a look at a biomass pyramid, we can see the amount of biomass that is present in a particular ecosystem and see how each of those tiers represents the standing crop or the total dry mass at each of the trophic levels. So you can see a typical trophic level biomass pyramid looks a little something like this. So we have a lot of primary producers, and then we get to primary consumers, there's a little less secondary, and then once again, very few tertiary consumers. Now, there are some aquatic ecosystems that have kind of an inverted biomass pyramid like this one. And that's because when we look at those ecosystems, the phytoplankton, the producers, get consumed very quickly by the primary consumers, but they reproduce a lot faster and therefore can support a larger biomass of those primary consumers. So the phytoplankton get eaten a lot, but they reproduce at a fast enough rate that we can have a lot of these primary consumers here. This chart just shows us some examples of the energy flow in the ecosystem of Georgia. So you can see we are getting a lot of energy from the sun. And then as we move higher, we're getting less and less energy. This has an important impact on us as humans because if you think about humans, we typically fall in the tertiary or quaternary consumer level of the ecological pyramid. But if you think about what we are able to eat, as we are omnivores, we can eat plants and animals. You can see from this pyramid that eating meat is not the most efficient way of getting energy. We don't get as much energy from meat as we do from plants. And so if we move to more plant-based diets, we could actually feed much more people because we're getting more energy, more bang for our buck, and there are more plants than there are higher level consumers. So the resources are not as limited. So that's just something to think about as we end this section of 42.3.